I feel like we're making some major progress over here because we're about to start the second last Mishnah of Pirkei Avos. Well, at least the first chapter of Pirkei Avos. So that's like major progress. I think we could almost make a siyum, have some kind of a major celebration as we get to finish. But it is progress because we've been learning in detail. And so when you learn something in detail, then it means that you really own the space, so to speak, when you've finished. So that's our goal. Our goal is to, so to speak, celebrate having completed the first perek. Okay, so let's have a look. What we're going to find in this perek is we'll firstly be introduced to a new person who we haven't yet learned before, we haven't yet encountered before. So that's our first thing. And that new person is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, obviously, goes without saying, he is the son of Rabban Gamliel, who we learned about in the previous Mishnah. What is going to be interesting is that the way he's introduced to us is not by name, not with his full name and his full title. He will be introduced in the context of his father. Now that immediately is interesting to us, as opposed to the next Mishnah where we come across Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel by full name. So we're going to talk about that. Just to give you a little bit of historical background, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, this week we're going to have the date of Tisha B'Av, and one of the things that we talk about in the Kinois, in the morning dirges, so to speak, of Tisha B'Av, is we talk about the Asara Harugei Malchus, the 10 individuals who were murdered by the Romans, 10 great rabbis who were murdered by the Romans. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was one of the 10. He was executed on the same day as Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol, Rabbi Yishmael the high priest. And in fact, they were both schlepped in front of the Romans at the same time, and there was a little conflict between them as to who should be executed first, because neither one wanted to witness the other being killed. Eventually they drew lots, the Romans, in their great magnanimous kindness. They decided to draw lots, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel drew the first lot, so he was actually killed first. Rabbi Akiva, when he heard that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel had been killed, and that Rabbi Yishmael Kohen Gadol had been killed, he said to everybody, those are the two great righteous individuals who could protect us from whatever challenges or tragedies might be coming. So now we can expect bad times ahead. In other words, they were considered so righteous that they could carry, so to speak, the weight of the Jewish people's averas or whatever it is that may have caused us to be punished. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is also an interesting person, not only because of his teachings, as we shall see, but he's also interesting in terms of what he did for the community. So at this particular time, when Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel lived, it was still during the time of the temple, and there were individuals who try to make money. Can you imagine this? Jewish people who try to make money off their fellow Jews. Horrific. And essentially what happened was, at that time, you used to buy animals, or you would buy birds to bring us certain kinds of offerings in the Beis Hamikdash. So these unscrupulous individuals hiked the prices of doves, because doves were very necessary. They used to be brought regularly in the Beis Hamikdash, so they hiked the prices to make money off the community. And when Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel heard this, he immediately scrapped a whole lot of the offerings that required doves, so that there would be no market for people who try to make money off the community. So that just gives you a little bit of an insight into the kind of person, the individual who we're dealing with over here when we learn about Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Let's have a look at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, remember last week we learned the Mishnah of Rabban Gamliel, and so this week we're going to see that his son is introduced exactly that way, as his son. So Shimon benoi oimer. Shimon, his son, said. And that's the first question we need to analyze in this Mishnah. Why is a person of the stature of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who is truly a great person, why is he introduced over here in context of his father? Almost makes it sound like he doesn't have greatness of his own, and his greatness is completely contingent on his father's greatness. Now, you might want to answer very simply, well, this is because perhaps what he's going to talk about relates to the period in his life when he was growing up, when he was his father's son. as opposed to the things that he would have taught as the great leader of Israel. That is a possibility. Let's have a look. So Shimon benoi Omer, Shimon, his son, the son of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, taught as follows: Kol yomai godalti bein hachachamim. My whole life, I grew up between the sages. Now, the obvious reason for that is because his father was Rabban Gamliel, and he was a leading sage, and he was the Nasi, the spiritual leader of the Jewish people at the time. And you can well imagine that everybody flocked to him to learn from him, to be in his environment. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, growing up in that home, obviously had rabbis all around him all the time, and that's what he's relating to. My whole life, I grew up between the sages. Truth of the matter is that really what he's saying? When a person says my whole life, he doesn't say my whole childhood, my whole youth. He says my whole life I grew up amongst the sages. So we're going to need to analyze that. Why does he say my whole life I grew up amongst the sages? And then he continues to teach us three things that all really appear to be one teaching. Number one, he says, V'loi matzasi leguf toiv mishtika. I never found anything better for the body than silence. So what do you think he's telling us? I mean, there are various places within Torah that we speak about the value of silence. You know, for example, it says in the Talmud, Mila besela shtikusa betray, that one word is worth one gold coin. Silence is worth 2 golden coins. So that immediately implies, of course, that there is a value in silence. Okay? So why then does he say, V'loi matzasi leguf toiv mishtika? I find nothing better for the body than silence. Surely what he should say is, I find nothing better for the soul than silence. Or he may have just simply said, I find that there is no better trait than silence. Now, the words of the Mishnah are always very specific. And if he uses this expression and he says, I haven't found anything better for the body than silence, we have to analyze that and we have to appreciate what does he mean specifically about the body. Then he continues, apparently on the same theme. The study and the exposition of Torah is not the main focus of Torah. Maaseh, the action, is the main focus of Torah. And you'll see this actually quoted all over the place. We use the expression, ha-maaseh hu ha'ikar, that the main thing is deed. You could learn from here till who knows when. And unfortunately, we know that this is what happens to people. You get people who know a tremendous amount of theory, they know the learning, but do they actually apply it? So apparently that's what he's saying, that the most important thing is not how much you know, but how much you practice. Or as they say in today's fridge magnets, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So is that what he's telling us? Is that what he's telling us? Put your money where your mouth is. Actually do the things that you profess to everybody else. Let's see if that is what he's teaching us. Because if it is what he's teaching us, so what's so surprising about that? Okay. Main thing is to apply things in action. Did we not already see from Shammai just a couple of Mishnahs back, 2 Mishnahs ago, didn't Shammai say exactly the same thing? What did he say? He said, Emor me'at va'aseh harbe. Speak little and do much. So, the Mishnah is not into repetition just for the sake of filling the pages or showing us how much the scholars knew. There's got to be something different that he's teaching us when he says that Midrash is not the main thing, Maaseh, action is. Oh, and by the way, there seems to be a little bit of a contradiction here. Let's go back. He said there's nothing better than silence. Nothing better than silence. You read that and you think, in that case, I should keep quiet, surely. Under all circumstances, in all situations, at all times. And then what does he say? Loi ha-midrash iker. The exposition of Torah, giving a drosha, which of course requires words. That's what Midrash is. It's the discussion, the conversation, the sharing, the sermonizing about issues in Torah is not the ikar, it's not the main thing. Well, one second, you just told me that the main thing is to keep quiet. Now you're telling me that speaking is not the main thing. So in your first statement, it sounds like you shouldn't be speaking at all. And in your second statement, it sounds like you should be speaking, but it's not the main thing. So which one is it? Does he advocate silence, or does he just advocate that speaking is not the main thing? So we'll have to analyze that too. And then, in case you didn't get it, in case you didn't pick up the theme over here, that speaking is not great by Rabbi Shimon's standards, he reiterates, V'chol hamar bedvorim mevi chet. Any person who speaks a lot will eventually bring to sin. Okay? So we can understand that. That's quite obvious, because if you speak a lot, you'll probably end up saying things you're not supposed to say. People who speak without thinking are typically the kind of people who will gossip. They're the type of people who might use language that is inappropriate. They are the type of people who may say things that are critical or insulting. Okay, so we get it. Anybody who talks a lot, maybe chet, is going to bring themselves to a position of sin. The only thing is that when we began Pirkei Avos, we identified that the Gemara tells us Pirkei Avos is mili de chasidusa. That means that most of the Mishnah, as most of the Talmud, as most of the Torah, talks about practical din, the laws that we're supposed to follow. Pirkei Avos is midas chasidus, which is lifnim mishuras adin, beyond the requirement of the law. So, v'chol hamar bedvorim mevi chet, if you're going to tell me that to speak a lot can bring to sin, that's not mili de chasidusa, that's not something which is beyond the requirement of the law. That is something which is stated actually in the law. Well, at least in the words of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, because he says, Beroiv dvorim, through many words, loy yechdal pesha. You won't be able to reduce or avoid sin. So this is not a chiddush, this is not something new that Rabbi Shimon is teaching us. This is something we already know from King Solomon, the wisest of all men. So we need to understand, what is Rabbi Shimon trying to tell us over here? Okay? So he's not just telling us, as you might have thought, that silence is golden, even though that is true. That's not his teaching at this particular point in time. And therefore our question is, so what is his teaching? What's he telling us? And what is so radical and innovative about Rabbi Shimon's approach? So let's start at the beginning. Why is he called Shimon Benoi, Shimon his son? Why is he not called Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, which is his full title? Of course, all of the rabbis at some point were the sons of somebody, and many of them were the sons of people who were great. So this is not the first time we've encountered somebody who stood in the shadow of his father. That cannot be the reason why he's introduced as Shimon Benoi. And if you want to tell me that the reason he's introduced as Shimon the son is because he wants to talk about his childhood and how he grew up with sages around the house, Kol Yomai Godalti Ben Achachamim, well, as I mentioned right at the beginning, then he should have said, in my youth I was surrounded by sages. Because obviously his point that he wants to make is, and I learned the following principles from them. But he doesn't say that. He says, my whole life I grew, or I spent time, the word he uses is I grew between the Chachamim, between the sages. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's theme in this Mishnah is not the theme of speaking versus not speaking. Think about it. There are certain times where the worst thing to do is not to speak. How's about that somebody needs encouragement? How's about you need to express love to your children? How's about if you're called on to share words of Torah in an environment where you are the most knowledgeable person? Then it's no good to keep silent. The theme of Rabbi Shimon's teaching is not the value of silence. Silence has a place. Speaking also has a place. It's quite a famous story of an individual who came for a personal audience with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him a question and he was quiet, he was silent. So the Rebbe said, "Nu, why don't you speak up? I've asked you about a particular topic, why don't you speak up?" He said, the Talmud says, Mila b'sela shtikusa bitrei, that a word is worth a coin and silence is worth 2 coins. To which the Rebbe said, that's true. So if you're silent for the entire period of time, you only get 2 coins. But if every word is worth a coin, then when you speak, if the words that you say are meaningful, you get many coins. There's a time to be silent. There's a time to speak. The Gemara tells us that there are people who destroy the world. You know who destroys the world? People who do not have knowledge or insight, and they insist on speaking, as well as people who have knowledge and insight and refuse to speak. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is not teaching us over here the value of silence. He's teaching us something far more profound. He's talking in the context of Torah learning. We know that because he says, I grew up with the sages and I spent my whole life growing with the sages. So he's telling us that whatever he will speak about is in the context of the sages and the learning experience. We also see that he talks about midrash, which is a process of study. So he's talking in the context of study. And in this context, he says, the first thing you have to know is who you are before you begin to learn. And certainly before you begin to teach, you have to contextualize yourself. The worst thing that we can have is people who get up to teach others, or for that matter, people who learn on their own from a position of ego and arrogance. Unfortunately, it happens. It's not altogether rare. And the unfortunate thing is that when a person takes the approach of arrogance, it's all about me, my learning, my wisdom, my insight, my perspective, then two things happen. The first one is the person doesn't necessarily learn things as they are objectively. The person learns things as they see them. And the way that we see things, unfortunately, is subjectively. Secondly, and you know this from your own experience, you know how it is that there are certain people, the minute they start to talk, they speak with such a sense of self, with such a sense of the I, that you actually can't listen to them. I heard somebody once express it this way: who you are speaks so loudly that I can't hear what you're saying. So right at the beginning, before he talks about learning and silence and all of these things, he introduces the Mishnah about, obviously he didn't write the Mishnah about himself. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi wrote the Mishnah, but it's worded in such a way to capture what it is that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel wants to say. I am nobody of my own account. I am on the shoulders of those who came before me. I am the son of my father. That's who I am. It's not me. I'm not brilliant. I'm not amazing. I'm gifted. I was fortunate to have the bracha of being born into this family, to have this illustrious father, to have access to these sages. That's why I am who I am. I'm not going to take the credit for it. On the contrary, I'm going to give gratitude to Hashem, and I will be humble because of this amazing opportunity that Hashem gave me that was not of my choosing. That's his opening statement. Shimon Benoi, I am the son of Rabban Gamliel. I don't stand here in my personal capacity, ramrod straight with a sense of self. I stand here with a humility and an acceptance that I'm here because of what was given to me. Incidentally, by the way, you'll find that very often in the Talmud, when we refer to Mashiach, we don't refer to him as Mashiach. Many times we just refer to him as Ben David. The sages ask, when is Ben David going to come? When will the son of King David come? For exactly the same reason. Because what he wants to say is, or what the Talmud wants to say is that one of the iconic elements of Mashiach will be his absolute humility. So even though Mashiach will be a king, and Mashiach will be a leader, and Mashiach will be a teacher, and Mashiach will even teach Moshe himself, Mashiach will be absolutely humble to the point that he sees himself just as a continuation of a beautiful golden chain of lineage. This is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's opening statement. What's his opening statement? Kol yomai godalti bein hachachamim. My whole life I grew between the sages. What does that mean, my whole life? Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel in his time was the Nasi. He was the single most senior member of the Jewish community, the chief rabbi, the spiritual leader, the person who had to deal with Jewish communal affairs. He was the most respected person out of everybody. He could have easily turned around and said, I've graduated the sages. I grew up with them around my house, but at the end of the day, I'm beyond that, I've passed that experience. I'm no longer at the level of the sages and learning from the sages. I'm now the top person. They should be learning from me. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says the first thing you have to know is my whole life I continued to learn from the sages. And not only did I learn, he doesn't say I learned from the sages. He says, Godalti, I grew from the sages. Even when I reached that point in my own spiritual development where you may well have thought, oh, you don't have to grow any further. Look how amazing you are. Look what you've already done. Look how far you've progressed. You don't have to grow any further. Nobody else can teach you. Who can add value to you? He says, I'll tell you my personal experience. Kol yomai, my whole life, godalti bein hachachamim, I continued to grow from the learning that I had from the sages. And here he teaches us something incredibly important. You never stop growing. You can choose to stop growing, and that would be a terrible thing, but you should never stop growing. The fact that Hashem gives a person another day on this earth, the fact that Hashem gives us the opportunity to interact with other people, even if those people may well be less knowledgeable than us, every day is an opportunity to grow, and every person offers us an opportunity to learn. That's what he says. So the theme of this Mishnah is not the theme of silence. The theme of this Mishnah is the theme of approaching Torah from a perspective of absolute humility. That's his theme. Now that we recognize the theme, let's go and have a look at the details of what he's told us in this Mishnah, and you'll see how each one of them expresses the theme in one way or another. The first thing he tells us is, V'loi matzasi leguf toiv mishtika. I never found anything better for the body than silence. Why does he emphasize the body? You see, when it comes to humility, the neshama doesn't need to be taught humility. The neshama is naturally humble. The neshama is acutely aware of where it comes from. It's absolutely in touch with Hashem. It recognizes that Hashem is the only reality. It doesn't need to be trained to be humble. The body, on the other hand, well, that's a different story. And by the way, when we talk about the body, we're not just talking about the physical anatomy of the human body. There's a big element that plays a massive role in the body. It's called the Yetzer Hara. Ever heard of him? Most people here are unfamiliar with the Yetzer Hara. But anyhow, let me explain to you. There's this thing called the Yetzer Hara, which is this inclination that people have to do things that they're not supposed to do. That's what impacts the body. Now, people say, okay, I've got a Yetzer Hara. What should I do about it? I feel that I'm so often tempted to do things which are contrary to what Hashem wants, on the one hand. Or alternatively, I find that it's so difficult to motivate myself to do what Hashem does want. So the Yetzer Hara either pulls us in a negative direction and we don't know how to hold ourselves back, or the Yetzer Hara gets in the way of us doing the good things, and we don't know how to overcome it. So people make all kinds of suggestions. And one of the popular suggestions is you should break the physical body. For example, you should fast. If you fast, that will deal with your Yetzer Hara, because we all know it's a Jewish Yetzer Hara, and a Jewish Yetzer Hara loves food. So as long as you're fueling it with food, it feels very satisfied, it feels very empowered, and then all the bad things start to happen from that. Starve your Yetzer Hara and everything will be good. You know, there's a problem with that. I mean, it could work, could absolutely work. It worked for King David. It says that he killed his Yetzer Hara through fasting. It could also backfire. I don't know about you, but there are quite a number of people in the Jewish community who see on the calendar that this Thursday is Tisha B'Av and we're not going to be allowed to eat, and they already have anxiety in advance. People are drinking water and carb loading and doing all kinds of things and trying to find out if in coronavirus you really have to fast. Maybe there's a rabbi who can give us a loophole because my neighbor had a symptom. So maybe because we're absolutely afraid of fasting. And not only that, what happens when we fast? Oh gosh, I can't move. I can't do anything. I'll deal with it tomorrow because I'm so weak. I haven't eaten in 6 hours. Like the fast had just kind of begun and we're already totally flushed out. So yes, it could work to kill the Yetzer Hara through fasting, but it could equally work to kill the Yetzer Tov in the same process. In other words, I don't have the energy to learn or to daven with proper focus and intention. I find myself doing less mitzvahs while I'm fasting, even though the fasting is a mitzvah. So sometimes it could backfire. Comes Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and he says, you want to know the best weapon against your Yetzer Hara? One that is even more difficult to fulfill than fasting. One that doesn't necessarily weaken you as badly as fasting, so it doesn't have the same side effects. And believe it or not, is more powerful than fasting. You want to know what to do? Shtika. Silence. Instead of preventing things from coming into your mouth to try and weaken the Yetzer Hara, prevent things from coming out of your mouth. You'll be amazed at what kind of an impact that would have on the Yetzer Hara. That's why he emphasizes, I never found anything better for the body than silence. The body over here referring to the things that the body is predisposed to do, which are not aligned with what Hashem would want. So that speaks directly to his theme. What's his theme? Humility. Humility is, I have something I'd like to say, but I'm humble enough to accept that I should not say it. It's inappropriate, and so I'm going to bite my tongue. That is humility. And that helps a person to prepare themselves to be in a space where they can do what Hashem wants. So now you'll say, okay, so I'm not going to talk. I'm certainly not going to talk nonsense. I'm not going to talk gossip. I'm not going to talk bad things. What should I do instead? Everybody will tell you. Use the same capacity for speech to learn Torah. Great. You've given me a fantastic solution right now. I do enjoy speaking, so what I'll do is I'll take out a Gemara and I'll plonk down somebody across the table from me and we'll talk. We'll talk in learning, we'll debate, we'll have discussions. It will be fantastic. And this way I'll safeguard myself against the Yetzer Hara and I'll ensure that I remain humble enough not to say things that I shouldn't say. Says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, "V'lo midrash iker ela hamaiseh." Careful now. Don't fall into a trap that says the main thing is to guard speech, so therefore what I'm going to spend all of my time doing is studying Torah. Yes, the lion's share of my time, I should study Torah, absolutely. But it shouldn't now become the excuse for not doing mitzvahs. Oh, I'm too busy studying. You know, I'm humble. I'm working on this humility. I'm not going to get involved in some big communal project where they might put my name on a sign and who knows what, then people will think that I'm arrogant. No, I'm going to keep a low profile. I'll stay in the yeshiva. Lo ha-medrash ikar ela ha-maaseh, he says. Humility doesn't mean that you do what you feel you should do in order to be humble. Humility is that you accept to do what Hashem wants of you. So there's a time where Hashem wants you in the base medrash learning, and there's a time where he wants you out on the streets doing. And a person needs to be humble enough to accept and to hear, number one, that I have to have both, and number two, when it's time to pause the one in order to do the other, when it's time to stop learning in order to actually do a mitzvah. He also tells us at the same time, Kol ha-marbeh devarim, anybody who talks a lot and talks a lot and talks a lot and talks a lot will lead to sin. Well, now we understand why, because the person who talks a lot is not willing to relinquish their own ego. That person is not willing to accept what Hashem wants. They're too busy chasing what they would like to do, so therefore they'll keep silent. Therefore they'll keep talking because they want to talk about me. What's the thing? If you talk a lot, it's going to bring to chet. By the way, the word chet does not necessarily always mean sin. The word chet also means to be lacking. It means that my spirituality will be lacking because I still hang on to my own ego. That's quite interesting. They tell a story that there was a fellow who came to the Baal Shem Tov with a complaint. The complaint was that he had been taught that any person who does not speak one word out other than Torah for 40 days without a break, such a person will merit to see the revelation of Eliyahu HaNavi, Elijah the prophet. He says, Rebbe, for 40 days now I've kept my mouth shut. I haven't said a word. And Elijah didn't appear to me. The Baal Shem Tov said, let me show you something. He took him outside and they went next door and they went to the stable of the wagon driver who lived next door. And the Baal Shem Tov showed him that there was a horse. And he said, you see that horse? He also hasn't spoken negatively for 40 days. In other words, it doesn't help just to keep silent. Lo matzasi leguf toiv mishtika. I haven't found anything that is better for the body than silence. That's true, but still, you have to have midrash. That's why there's no contradiction between the first and the second stanza. The first stanza says the kind of speaking which is associated with body and Yetzer Hara and physicality, nothing better than to keep that quiet. But midrash, the kind of talking that is meaningful and that is associated with Torah, is still important. It may not be the ikar, it may not be the main thing just to learn in theory and not translate it into action, but it has value because it feeds you, it changes you, it elevates you, and it makes you somebody who is in a more meaningful place. He also, by the way, he alludes to this. Sometimes people get their humilities mixed up. So, for example, like I said before, the Gemara tells us that there are two people who destroy the world. The one who doesn't know what they're talking about and insists on speaking, and the one who has value to share and refuses to speak. So we get our humilities mixed up sometimes. A person says, "Nu, teach us. Nu, inspire us. Tell us." And, "Oh no, not me. What do I know? I don't know anything." That's why he says, "Lo matzasi leguf toiv mishtika." When it comes to things related to the physical reality, there's nothing better than silence. But when it comes to things related to the spiritual reality, when it comes to your neshama, let it speak. Express things that are of a spiritual nature. Teach people. Influence. Share. Inspire. Don't second guess yourself. As the pasuk says, "V'eshalcha barachava," you should walk with a broadness of spirit. When it comes to the spirit, you should walk with confidence. By the way, that's one of the reasons we discussed this in the very first Mishnah. If you remember, I know it was a very long time ago. We discussed in the very first Mishnah why the Torah was given on a mountain. If it's going to be given on a mountain, why the lowest mountain? And if it's going to be given on a low place, why a mountain at all? To teach us this balance, that humility is key to Torah. But when it comes to Torah, I stand like a mountain, firm, confident, and ready to share and to inspire with others. Another explanation, by the way, when it says "Loi hamidrash iker elo hamaiseh," that the main thing is not the learning but the action. It actually means in learning itself. You know, the two areas of Torah that we identify. There's what we call Pnimius HaTorah and what we call Nigled Torah, the so-called esoteric and so-called revealed parts of the Torah. And different people appreciate different things. Many people, especially in today's world, love esoteric. Tell me about angels. What's the nature of my soul? How does God do miracles? Is it true that if you sleep with your feet facing the door, some kind of spiritual energy will come into your house? You know, people like all these esoteric things. You know, it's funny because very often rabbis get these questions. Like over the last 2 days, I had exactly that. I had the question about sleeping with your feet facing the door. Like, do I have to rearrange the whole room? And the other one was about pouring backwards. You know, if you pour a drink, pouring backwards, which we're told you're not supposed to do because that's how they do the tahara, how they purify bodies before burial. So you speak to people and you say, "Tell me something. You're worried about these energies in your house. When last did you ensure that your mezuzahs are all kosher?" "Oh, no, I think we did that about 10 years ago." Now, hang on a second. Mezuzah is actually mandated by the Torah. Sleeping with your feet facing the door is kind of a custom which has a spiritual basis. So why is it that for whatever reason we tend to prioritize the esoteric over the pragmatic? That's what he's telling us. Lo midrash iker. The main part of Torah learning should not be all these abstract spiritual concepts. You have to do it. It's incredibly important. You have to learn the esoteric part of Judaism because you have to learn every part of Judaism. Yesterday was the Yortzeit of the Arizal, and the Arizal says that every neshama will keep returning to this world again and again and again until you get all 613 mitzvahs and until you've learned every area of Torah. So we've got to do it all. But it's not the ikar. It's not the mainstay of Judaism, all the esoteric stuff. Maaseh, the part of Torah that relates to how you should behave in real practical terms, that's the main thing. That's the main thing that we should focus on. Again, it goes back to humility. Be humble enough to accept that there are things that the Torah is going to tell me to do that maybe I don't enjoy doing, but that's what the Torah says, so I have to do it. Also, an interesting thing that he does say is, Kol hamarbe devarim mevi chet. Any person who speaks a lot will bring sin. He's actually addressing, amongst other things, he's speaking to all of us, but he's also addressing a teacher. The Gemara tells us in Psachim, La'olam yeshana adam latalmidoi derech kitzara. A teacher should always be succinct and concise when teaching. Because sometimes when you're too flowery or too euphemistic in teaching, the student doesn't actually know what you're talking about. And then they misinterpret, and that's what can cause sin. So when we have to give an instruction, it has to be clear. Guess what? He might be talking over here about teaching Torah, but I promise you it's a great lesson for parenting too. You don't want your kids to do things that they shouldn't do? Tell them clearly. Don't do X. Don't give them this whole sermon about, you know, when people do this kind of thing, how they're going to grow up and what's going to become of you, and like a whole drosha. Maybe chet. That kind of thing is going to lead to misbehavior. You want to prevent misbehavior? Just don't be marbed devorim. Don't overstate what needs to be said. Be clear, be concise, make the point, and move on. And then there's a powerful esoteric perspective to all of this. The powerful esoteric perspective is that the way Hashem interacts with his world is no different to how we interact with our world, because Hashem, after all, designed us to reflect him. So the way that we interact with our world is thoughts and speech. Thoughts is how we perceive and understand our world. Speech is what we communicate with the world. Needless to say, obviously, people don't know what's going on inside of our minds until such time as we share it with them through speech. In the same way, Hashem interacts with his world in two ways. There's a dimension of Hashem that is his speech. It's called creation. You go back to the beginning of Bereshis, you read the story of creation, and it's all about Hashem talking. And the Lord said, let there be this, and the Lord said, let there be that. It's speaking. That's the kind of relationship that exists between Hashem and us. Then there's another relationship, and that is the intention for the world. Why is there a world? Why did Hashem put us here? Now, he doesn't say that. What does it mean he doesn't say that? He doesn't reveal that. What we see when we look around is what he was willing to tell us. In other words, reveal to us the world. The purpose of the world, the intention of the world, why I'm in the world, what I should achieve in this world, that's not told to us. That is shtika. That is silent. That's the part of the world that is secret. And our job is to explore. V'loi matzasi leguf toiv mishtika. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, I've found nothing more valuable for the development of the human, the guf, the physical, not the neshama when it was floating up in Gan Eden before we were born, not the neshama when it will return to Gan Eden after we pass. Now, in the guf, in the physical world, there's nothing better for the physical world than shtika, the exploration of what is not said, what is not obvious, what is beyond the experience of creation. If you want to know what Judaism is really all about, Judaism is not about understanding the world. Judaism is about transcending the world and then bringing that transcendent energy back into the world. Judaism is not about what is stated, which is what is obvious. Judaism is about what is unstated, what is hidden, what is secret, what is surprising. So if you look throughout the Torah, the whole Torah is always designed to force us to probe. Why does it say this? Why do we have to have this law? You ever notice how Jews ask questions? We don't only ask questions, we answer with questions. And the reason for that is because we are trained to always look beyond. So, Loi matzasi leguf toiv mishtika. I never found anything that was better for the body than silence. Now, what is silence? See, he started off by telling us that the theme of this mission is the theme of absolute humility. And in the language of the mystics, absolute humility is what we call bittul, the willingness to completely surrender myself to Hashem. Not just to be humble, but to completely let go of the I to the point, whatever Hashem wants, I'm going to do it. Whether it's comfortable or not, whether it resonates or not, whether I appreciate it or not, whether I understand it or not, if that's what Hashem wants, I'm going to do it. Na'aseh v'nishma. I'm absolutely committed, boots and all. That's the theme that he's talking about, this theme of complete bittul. Complete bittul means I silence myself. The way that we walk, he's not talking just that I silence myself, that I don't talk. I silence the sense of self. The way that we walk around through the world, which is completely natural, is we constantly filter the world through our own preconceptions. It's an incredible thing, but that's what we do. That's why, for example, you'll have two people who'll go to the same lecture and they will both walk out saying, did you hear he said what I've always been saying? And they may very well be disagreeing with each other. It's one of the fascinating elements of human character, the ability to filter the world through our personal lens. I never found anything that would be better for the human experience than to be able to silence the I. What does that mean? So the neshama obviously is connected to Hashem. The neshama is not connected to Hashem in the revealed, obvious way that you can see a connection. You can't even see the neshama. The neshama belongs to the world of thought. Those elements of creation we cannot see and we cannot identify. The body lives in the world of speech. Those things that Hashem has revealed to us. The goal of Judaism is to get the body to experience something similar to what the neshama experiences. The goal of Judaism is to get the body to feel this incredible connection and oneness with Hashem that is typically only reserved for the neshama. If you want to know what distinguishes Judaism from most spiritual practices will tell you there's a conflict between body and spirit, and only one of them can win. And so the objective of most spiritual practices is to, as best as possible, divest from the body so that you can speak the language of the soul, so you can hear your spirit. Judaism says the goal is to get the body to experience what only the soul can experience. Lo motzasi leguf toiv mishtika. I haven't found anything that is more meaningful, more powerful, more impactful for the human body, for the physical human being, than to get a human being to reach a point where they are completely connected to Hashem with absolute submission, like the neshama is. Okay, that might sound quite lofty. How am I ever going to get there? Well, firstly, we have the guarantee that at the time of Mashiach, we will all live with that reality. That's why we talk about a resurrection at the time of Mashiach, because we'll have the opportunity to be able to connect to Hashem at the highest level via the body. But we can actually start that now. And the way we start that now is with humility. I don't just do what comes naturally. I don't just speak when I want to speak. I don't just pursue the interests of the body, but I ensure that the body is willing to submit its wishes, and instead, it focuses on doing what Hashem wants. So it's quite a powerful Mishnah, because it's, in a sense, you could say one of the fundamental teachings of the whole of Judaism is the approach of having this incredible sense of humility and submission to Hashem. As I am, who I am, even when I'm Shimon Benoi, I don't have a title of my own. I don't have accolades of my own, achievements of my own. I'm a nobody. Who am I? Even I can achieve the point, this connection of Hashem, where my body feels and resonates the experience of my soul. Can you only imagine what life would be if we could taste that? And he's telling us that we can.